The Romano family name was etched into the skyline of the city. Every towering building, every glossy billboard, every headline seemed to whisper their influence. To the world, Elena Romano was a princess born into untouchable privilege, her life a carefully curated dream. She wore gowns that cost more than most people's yearly salary, attended galas where champagne flowed like water, and appeared in magazines with a smile that looked flawless, almost rehearsed. But behind the shimmering facade, Elena lived with annoying unease. She had been receiving anonymous threats for months, letters slipped under doors, shadowy figures spotted near her penthouse, her name scrawled in red ink on the walls of parking garages. At first she brushed it off as the price of fame and fortune, but when the threat became more specific, mentioning her routines, the people she trusted, the places she frequented, her father decided it was time to bring in someone who would keep her safe. That someone was Damon Kane. The first time Elena saw him, she thought her father had hired a soldier straight out of some action film. He was tall, with broad shoulders that seemed capable of carrying the weight of the world. His dark hair was cropped close, his jawline sharp as if cut from stone. But it was his eyes that unsettled her the most, cool, calculating, scanning every corner of the room like a man who had lived too long in places where danger never announced itself. "Miss Romano," he said, his voice low and steady, "I'll be handling your security detail from now on." Elena arched an eyebrow. "You mean babysitting?" He didn't so much as blink. "Call it what you like, my job is to keep you alive." Her father clapped Damon on the shoulder with satisfaction, but Elena crossed her arms unimpressed. She had grown up surrounded by men who thought intimidation was power, who equated seriousness with competence. Damon wasn't the first stoic man to enter her orbit, but unlike the others, there was something about him that felt different, not a hunger for status or money, but a sense of purpose, like protecting people wasn't just his job, it was his identity. At first, she rebelled against his presence. She snuck out of her penthouse in the middle of the night, disguising herself with a hood and slipping past the chauffeur Damon had stationed at the lobby. She thought she had escaped, until she found Damon leaning casually against the railing of the rooftop bar she'd run to. "You lasted 14 minutes, he said, not even looking up from his phone. 14 minutes of freedom, she shot back, sliding into the stool beside him. "That's a record." "You're testing my patience," Damon said evenly. But when she laughed at his deadpan expression, something flickered in his eyes, a trace of amusement he quickly buried. It became a game after that. She pushed boundaries, he reinforced them. She tried to catch him off guard, and he met her with unshakable calm. Yet in those silent exchanges, Elena began to notice things she hadn't before. How he always positioned himself between her and the crowd. How his gaze swept over every room like a hawk scanning for prey. How he seemed to anticipate her movements before she made them. For someone who had spent her life surrounded by people who wanted something from her, her money, her connections, her image, Damon wanted nothing. Nothing except to keep her safe. The first time she saw him fight, it shattered the way she viewed him. It was supposed to be a glamorous night at the Verona Gala, a charity event that drew politicians, celebrities, and the city's elite. Elena wore a gown the color of midnight, her hair styled in loose waves. She played the part of the socialite perfectly, smiling for cameras, sipping champagne, twirling across the marble floor. But she never lost awareness of Damon, standing like a shadow at the edge of the room, his eyes constantly scanning. When she stepped outside for air, she thought she was alone. Then the men appeared, 3 of them, faces masked, their movements deliberate. "Miss Romano," one of them sneered, "your father sends his regards." Her heart slammed against her ribs. Before she could scream, Damon was there. He moved with precision, each motion controlled, efficient, brutal. A fist cracked against a jaw, a knee slammed into a ribcage, an arm twisted until bones snapped. Within seconds, the 3 men were on the ground, groaning, defeated. Elena stood frozen, her pulse racing, the silk of her gown clutched tightly in her fists. Damon's arm was bleeding, a dark stain spreading across his sleeve, but he barely seemed to notice. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her voice caught in her throat. You could have been killed." His gaze softened for the briefest moment. "That's my job." As security rushed in and sirens wailed in the distance, Elena pressed her trembling hands against his wound. "You're bleeding," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "I've had worse," he replied, but he didn't pull away. That was the night everything changed. Elena lay awake for hours afterward, replaying the scene in her head. The way he had placed himself between her and danger without hesitation. The way his blood had stained her hands. The way his eyes, so cold and distant before, had flickered with something unspoken when she touched him. For the first time in her life, Elena didn't feel like a burden, a pawn, or a symbol. She felt seen, protected not because of her name or her wealth but because she mattered. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more, but deep down as she drifted into uneasy sleep, she knew the truth was far more dangerous. She was falling in love with the man sworn to guard her, and that was a risk even Damon Kane might not be able to shield her from. Damon Kane lived by rules. Rules kept him alive in places where a single mistake meant death. Rules made him the man families like the Romanos trusted with their most precious assets. But ever since Alina stepped into his orbit, those rules had started to crack. He told himself it was her recklessness that unsettled him. She pushed boundaries like a child testing fire, refusing to understand the danger that lurked in the shadows. She laughed at his discipline, teased him for being programmed, and looked at him with eyes too bright for a world as dark as his. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous, she made him feel. And Damon couldn't afford to feel. Still, he found himself drawn to her in ways that defied reason. He noticed the curve of her smile when she managed to make him smirk against his will. He remembered the warmth of her hands pressing against his wound that night at the gala, the way her voice trembled with fear for him, not herself. He hated how his chest tightened whenever she put herself in danger, and hated even more how much he wanted to pull her close. To promise her safety not as a duty, but as a man who cared. Yet distance was survival. He reminded himself of that every day, until the night the walls finally shattered. The threats against Alina had been escalating. What began as anonymous letters evolved into detailed surveillance. A family insider was feeding information to their enemies, and Damon knew it was only a matter of time before someone tried again. He doubled her security, rerouted her routines, monitored every movement. But betrayal doesn't come from where you're watching. It was late and they were returning from a quiet dinner at a private estate. Damon insisted on a 3-car convoy, bulletproof SUVs with trained men, but as the vehicles sped down a lonely stretch of highway, the ambush came. Headlights blazed in the distance, then cut across the road. A van screeched sideways, blocking their path. In seconds, gunfire erupted, bullets slamming into metal, shattering glass. "Down!" Damon barked, yanking Alina to the floor of the SUV as the driver swerved violently. The bodyguards in the cars behind returned fire, but the attack was precise, surgical. Whoever planned it knew exactly where they'd be. Alina's breath came in ragged gasps. She clutched his arm. "Damon." "Stay down," he growled, already firing back through the shattered window. His movements were a blur of lethal efficiency, every shot measured, every action focused on one goal, keeping her alive. The SUV skidded to a halt as bullets tore through the tires. The attackers closed in, masked, armed, relentless. Damon shoved open the door, dragging Alina out with him, shielding her body with his own as they dove behind the smoking vehicle. "Run," she whispered desperately. Not without clearing the path. His tone left no room for argument. He moved like a shadow, disarming one assailant with a brutal strike, then firing at another with deadly accuracy. But in the chaos, Alina saw something she'd never seen before: fear. Not fear for himself, but for her. And then it happened. A gunman emerged from behind, raising his weapon at Alina. Damon spun, faster than thought, shoving her out of the line of fire. The bullet tore into his side. He staggered but didn't fall. With a snarl, he disarmed the shooter, dropping him with a final shot. Alina scrambled to his side as the last of the attackers retreated into the night, their van disappearing into the distance. Sirens wailed in the distance, but all she could hear was the ragged sound of Damon's breathing. Blood soaked his shirt, his jaw clenched against the pain, but his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, were locked on her. "You're safe," he rasped. "That's all that matters." "No," she cried, pressing her hands to the wound, her tears falling onto his chest. "Don't you dare do this, don't you dare leave me." Her voice broke as the words tumbled out, raw and unstoppable. "I love you, Damon. I don't care about the rules or the danger or what anyone says. I love you." For a moment, the world seemed to still. His face, hardened by years of discipline, softened, and for the first time, Damon let down his guard. "Alina," he whispered, his hand trembling as it brushed her cheek. "You weren't supposed to, but God help me, I love you too." The aftermath was a storm. Her family raged when they discovered what had happened. They tried to fire Damon, insisting he had crossed the line, failed in his duty by letting emotions cloud his judgment. Her father slammed fists on the table, demanding Alina see reason. But Alina had never felt more certain of anything in her life. She stood tall, her voice steady as she defied them. He took a bullet for me, he's the reason I'm alive, and he's the man I love. You can threaten, you can scream, but you will not take him away from me. Damon, bandaged and pale, tried to speak then, to offer himself up, to say he would walk away for her sake. But Alina silenced him with a look, fierce and unyielding. I decide who stays in my life, she said firmly, not you, not anyone else. For the first time, Damon realized she didn't need his protection in every way. Her spirit was stronger than he'd ever given her credit for. She wasn't just a woman born into privilege, she was fire, fierce and unbreakable. And he loved her for it. Days turned into weeks, the danger still lingering but their bond only deepening. Damon never stopped being vigilant, his instincts would never let him. But there were moments now when he allowed himself to be more than a shadow. He let her hold his hand during long drives. He let her tease him into smiling when no one was watching. He let her kiss him, slowly at first, then with a passion that consumed every rule he had ever lived by. In private, he was hers, not the soldier, not the bodyguard, but the man who had found something worth breaking every rule for. And Alina, she no longer saw him as just her protector. He was her anchor, her shield, her equal. The world could rage around them, threats could whisper in the dark, but as long as Damon was by her side, she knew she could face anything. The irony was not lost on either of them. A man hired to guard her heart had ended up claiming it. And though danger still lurked, though enemies still plotted in the shadows, Alina Romano and Damon Kane had already won the greatest battle of all, the courage to love each other in a world built to tear them apart.